I've just arrived at the bowling hall in Bradford and it's Halloween. What a great place to start. A special spooky edition of Bradford Through the Lens, with records of bowling hall dating back to the Domesday Book of 1086. The current house is one of the oldest in all of Bradford. It had served as a family home for over 5 centuries, from 1316, when the hall was taken over by William Bolling.
Good evening. Well, tonight we are not in America, so I'm not going to say trick or treat. We're in Bradford, so instead I'll say the more traditional Happy Halloween. And tonight we're at the historic bowling hall on the grounds of that haunted building, famously haunted in Bradford. And with me I have 𝗘𝗃𝗲𝗏𝗏, one of our subscribers.
Hi everybody.
And Kelly has recently launched a Facebook group called Bradford History and Hauntings. And Kelly is a little bit of an expert on things that go bump in the night, ghosts, poltergeists, paranormal activity. And we're going to bring you a story a little bit later on, which involves this part of Bradford, very, very close to Bowling Hall. But Kelly, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your interest in the paranormal? When did it start?
I've always been interested in it. Grew up in a haunted house.
Oh.
Yeah, very haunted, unfortunately.
Don't leave it there.
Well, we don't know who she was. We thought originally she was the lady that lived there, but it wasn't. So as I've got further on through life, gone into the paranormal, known more about it, she showed herself as being, first time I saw her, she was very grey and white, unfortunately no eyes, black holes for eyes. And she just appeared at the end of my bed, stepped out from behind the door, and she stood there. Now, I'd been naughty that night. I'd been sent to bed.
Right.
So I was crying in bed, carrying on as you do when you're like 5, 6 years old. And she appeared, well, as you can imagine, I stopped crying.
Yeah.
But and I hid under the covers all night. And then a couple of years later, I seen her again. But this time she was blue. And she floated from my mum's bedroom to the bathroom and back again. But she didn't look at me. She just totally ignored me.
Right.
But it was the same woman.
Was this in Bradford?
Yeah, in West Bowling.
Round here?
Yeah, West Bowling.
Wow.
Yes.
So that was like your first
That was my
experience,
first experience.
as a 6-year-old, did you say?
Yeah, 5, 6-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. And ever since then?
Ever since then, I've just been really intrigued.
Has it been like a quest to try and understand what happened to you?
Yeah, it has really. Yeah, that really kick-started it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, as much as I didn't like her, that kind of like...
Right.
Yeah, it was...
And that was just 2 sightings?
2 sightings in the same house.
Right. Never saw... Obviously, you'll have left that house, you never saw her again?
Never saw her again. No, never saw her again. And I've had other sightings. The house I live in now is pretty haunted.
Okay.
I've seen the girl one night. Now, this was when I was decorating. Now, this might be quite relevant later on.
Right.
And I was decorating the bathroom. I saw her, never mentioned anything to the kids, don't want them scared.
Yeah.
The next night, my son said, "Mum, I've seen a ghost." He described it. It was the same girl.
Wow.
It was the same girl. I've had shadow people in my house. That is where you see like a big, big shadow,
Yeah.
where you kind of catch it out of the corner of your eye kind of thing. And yeah, we've had pictures flying off walls. I've had haunted dolls, which I've now got rid of. Let me say, they've gone because they were haunted. One of the dolls just flew off the shelf.
Oh dear.
Yeah, not very good. So yeah, I've had a really good experience with it, but I love it. It's so interesting to me. I've been here at Bowling Hall. I've investigated here twice.
You had quite an interesting sound recording.
EVP,
Yeah, so if you're interested in seeing that, check out the Facebook page.
Yeah, it's on the page.
Bradford History and Hauntings. One question I've always wanted to know.
Yeah.
So spirits or ghosts, are they attached to people or places?
Generally places.
Yeah.
It's very rare you get an attachment to a person.
So that's why.
But generally places, yeah. Yeah, it is either attached to the land, which is more often than not, or the building. So, yeah, it is generally, like that ghost that I've seen, you know, she was attached to the building. It's nothing to do with us or anything like that, so.
Wow.
Yeah. and there's different types.
It's fascinating, aren't I?
It is fascinating.
I love a good ghost story,
Oh, me
especially when they're true.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as I mentioned earlier, we do have a ghost story for you. And like I say, it's within this area, not too far away. And we're going to go to that location in a minute. It was about 60 years ago, and it involved a house which was at the end of a coach lane, which did lead to Bowling Hall once upon a time. I believe that coach lane is long gone. But anyway, let's go there now. So we're just at the side of Wakefield Road. And here's one of the lovely old subways, which I believe their days are numbered. But anyway, it was here where there was a house. Like I said earlier, we're talking about 60 years ago now. And the house was on the market, and it had been part of the Bowling Hall estate. And it was at the end of a coach lane which led all the way over to Bowling Hall. And there was a couple, and they put in an offer for £500 to buy the house for a quick sale, and it was accepted. The house were in a bit of a state from what I can gather, but they thought it was one of those projects that you could really chuck yourself into and reap the rewards later. So this car park here, where Screwfix is, this is the vicinity of where the house was. We don't know exactly which house it was for sure, but we do know it was here. Like I say, it was a bit of an old wreck really, to the point where the husband thought the wife had lost her mind buying it. But anyway, they took the project on and they completely overhauled it, and they actually got workmen in, and they put down new floors, installed electricity, did everything that needed to be done. But one day the foreman of the workforce that was in there working came to the lady who'd bought the house, and she says, "We're pulling out. We can't work here anymore." And he pointed towards the lounge, indicating that the room was a bit of a problem. But he never actually said what the problem was. But he was good enough to pass on the details of another workforce that would come along and finish off the job. So they got these other people in, they carried on with the work, but the foreman of that team actually came to the woman one day and says, "Do us a favour, would you ask your kids not to mess around with the wallpapering table, etc." And she says, "But the kids aren't here." And he says, "Well, somebody's been here because all of the wallpapering stuff, it's all been moved about while we'd left the room." So you've got different types of ghosts, haven't you?
You have.
You've got like playful spirits from what I can gather.
Yep.
You've got the more
Sinister.
nasty, dangerous, sinister entities like poltergeists.
Yeah.
Does this
Yeah.
sound like poltergeist activity?
No, it
Why not?
doesn't. Because a poltergeist, which generally means a noisy ghost,
Yeah.
their activity starts off really subtle, and then it just builds up and up and up and up and up, and it will just explode, and it will be consistent. There won't be any breaks in it.
Right.
And you'll start off with like knocks, bangs, louder noises, sometimes voices, manifestation, to furniture moving, people actually being hurt and pinned up against things.
Right.
And sometimes, more sinister, to fires being started.
Right.
That's definitely not what's gone on here.
So we're talking basically
Your classic-
non-sinister.
Yeah, non-sinister. More an intellectual classic haunting, really.
Do you think there's anything that could have been happening within that house that might have triggered it off?
Often what I've come across, and I don't know if everybody else has, but it's like renovations, decorating,
Right.
things like that. It seems to trigger them for some reason.
Yeah.
Like I said, in my experience, that's happened. I don't know why. Don't know why it does. But often with these spirits that remain, it's because they've had. So, like for this house, for example, that we're talking about, maybe the spirits died in there. They've had a traumatic death. They don't want to move on because maybe one of their loved ones is still there.
Right.
Not necessarily in this case.
Yeah.
Or they just won't cross over for fear of purgatory, really, and being persecuted on the other side. But the classic telltale signs of this is generally things being moved, bangs, taps, apparitions appearing, noises, crying, wailing. Sometimes they emit odours where you'll come across a familiar like perfume that you might recognise, or they'll just give off, you know, other odours. If it's sinister, you'll have a really bad smell of sulphur, like eggs. So if it's nothing like that, you know, so yeah, that's basically what it seems like to me.
But there was actually one form of paranormal activity that did take place that you can't find any explanation for. It was just after the house had been completed, and the woman who bought it, she decided, with the help of her mother, that she wanted to throw a housewarming party for her friends and her family. And they got the room ready, the lounge, and after all that had been prepared, they left the lounge and they thought, we'll have a little bit of a rest before everybody comes in. And then just before the first guests arrived, they went into the lounge to have a look, and they noticed that water was coming down the walls, but there was no damp on the curtains or on the carpets. It just looked like somebody had chucked a bucket of water all over the walls, and they thought, oh lordy, we can't have anybody coming in here, so they had to have the housewarming elsewhere in the house. Now to me, that probably would have sounded like poltergeist activity, but
I've never heard of anything like that.
No.
And like she goes on to say that the walls were dry a bit later on. That soon as
Yeah,
much
they
as
miraculously
as fast
dried
as
out.
they were wet, they were
Yeah.
miraculously dry. And that just, no, I've never come across that. It just, so I'm quite sceptical about that little bit. You know, it just kind of doesn't happen because there'd be watermarks.
yeah.
You know, at least, or
It could even be that, what's that stuff called that ghosts sleep?
ectoplasm.
Yeah.
No.
You see that
no,
on
because that
Ghostbusters
would
now.
have, yeah, which it does happen, you know, but it's not that, because that would have left marks as well, so
Yeah.
yeah, I'm quite sceptical about that little bit of
And
the
she did say it
tale.
happened twice, because
She
didn't
did,
it happen?
and
Yeah.
it was, funnily enough, when guests were coming, so who knows, but I've, you know, personally I've never heard of it.
So we've just come down here again to the subway area, and there's another element to the story which involves the cellar of the house, which would have been perhaps maybe a little higher up than where we are now.
Yeah.
But there was issues with the cellar, weren't there?
Yeah.
The husband used to make sure that he'd bring enough coal up from the cellar for her before he went to work, because she just flatly refused to go down there, as did the family dog.
Yeah.
The dog was terrified of the cellar and also terrified of going upstairs. Animals seem to be quite susceptible to spirits. Do you know why that is?
I don't know why it is, but they do tend to pick up on them more so than what we do. Yeah. And I know he ran off into the garden at one point when he heard
That's
some
correct.
crying. So
Yeah.
So yeah. So,
I mean, I often wonder if it's because animals take things at face value, and they might be a little bit more open to things than what we
Yeah,
are.
possibly,
you
yeah.
know, we can be a little bit closed.
judgmental as well.
Yeah,
as
close-minded.
Yeah.
So, and the woman who bought the house, she actually started thinking she was going mad, didn't she? Because she was hearing things. She was hearing the sound of a woman crying.
Yeah.
She was terrified of taking a bath. She used to make sure that there was somebody in the house with her when she had a bath.
Yeah.
And I don't even think the husband believed her to start with.
No.
You know, I think he tried to laugh it off, telling her to get an early night or something like that, or
Which is quite classic of a lot
Yeah.
of people who experience this, unfortunately. Yeah.
But it did actually extend into the family unit, because they had a daughter, and one day she came downstairs saying that she'd seen a man in a bedroom wearing a big hat with feathers in,
Yeah.
a royalist perhaps, and then there was one night when the mother and father of the family, they were watching television downstairs, and they could hear footsteps above them, and they thought it were the children messing about, but when they went up to check it out, the kids were sound asleep in bed. So the family stayed in that house for about 8 years, and I think it was more towards the end of the 1960s that they decided they'd had enough. And we're currently under Wakefield Road at the moment in one of the subways, and it was around that time in the late 60s when Wakefield Road was earmarked for a widening scheme, a bit like Manchester Road was. And the family had heard about that, and they actually approached the council and said, do you want to buy our house off us? You know, so you've got the land basically if you are widening Wakefield Road, and the council did actually purchase the house from the family. And there was 2 sets of tenants that lived in the house temporarily, and it was a very temporary arrangement because they didn't stick around for long. No. They both sets of tenants left rather quickly. And then the house itself was eventually demolished, but the lady who shared the story, the lady who'd redeveloped the house in the early 60s, said that the land wasn't used for the widening of Wakefield Road, which leads us to believe that it was actually positioned where we said it was earlier, in the car park at 𝗘𝗃𝗄𝗏. But it's a curious story, you know, a local ghost story, and it'd be very, very interesting to hear from anybody involved with those businesses there, to see if there's been any paranormal activity, or has anybody bought something from 𝗘𝗃𝗄𝗏 and it's flown off the wall. Who knows, you know. But you know, a nice little Bradford ghost story for Halloween. And thank you very much for joining us and for your insight.
Thank you.
And I hope the viewers found it very interesting. And as we said at the start, Kelly has started up a Facebook group called Bradford History and Hauntings. Check it out, and if you've got any ghost stories on there that you're interested in finding out more about, you can always ask Kelly. If you've got ghost stories of your own, you know, document them, and you never know, we might come and make a video one day about them.
Absolutely.
But until the next vlog, happy Halloween, don't have nightmares.